pulled out onto the main road, the police would put the blue lights on and pull him over. They would ask Hawkins Jr. to show proper ID. They knew it was him. They had been watching him. He was very nervous, visibly shaking, looking from side to side. Hawkins Jr. asked why MPD Homicide wanted to speak to him. He didn't want to go back to the office. He wanted to talk right there in the middle of the parking lot. The sergeant told them that they could go back to his apartment. He agreed. Hawkins Jr. said he had no problem with talking to them, but he needed somebody to watch his kids. As they arrived back at his apartment, several investigators and several uniformed police officers were standing outside. The smell of bleach and aroma was overpowering. It stood still in the air. The lieutenant asked Hawkins why the strong smell of bleach. He responded he had been doing some cleaning. He told members of Charlene's family that they were coming to pick up the children. He wanted to argue about it, but it wasn't anything he could do. The lieutenant said he was extremely agitated to talk to them. He was almost in a paranoid state. Members of Charlene's family arrived to pick the children up. Hawkins wanted to complain, but he couldn't. He looked like he wanted to run off as fast as he could. He would be placed in the back seat of the squad car to prevent this from happening. The children left with Charlene's family. Now he agreed to ride to the MPD to talk to the police. The lieutenant couldn't recall if he was cuffed. It was a possibility, but he wasn't under arrest. He was not advised his Miranda rights. He was in an interview room where the door was locked from the outside, but there was a buzzer that he can tap to use for bathroom breaks and if he wanted to be free and go whenever he wanted. He basically said the same story he said before. He said they were arguing because Charlene said he was cheating, and she left in a dark-colored car, and she said, quote, "raise the kids," unquote, he added. Hawkins Jr. agreed to provide a broncho swab. He then said he had to go. He told them everything he knew about Charlene's disappearance. He said he didn't want to talk anymore. They continued, and he said they needed clarification on some other things, knowing Hawkins Jr. could leave again. But remember, he wasn't under arrest. Hawkins Jr.'s mother had called the jail and spoke to him, and she told him she will find him an apartment. She told him that Charlene and him didn't need to be together because they couldn't get along. This was added in the court transcripts. Hawkins Jr. didn't know. His children were answering questions as well in another interview room. Family members had allowed this, and they were present when the children were answering these questions. Several discrepancies were found with what the children were saying and with what Hawkins Jr. had said. As of 3 a.m., they received a 48-hour detention for probable cause of murder. While Hawkins Jr. had been at the MPD being interrogated, a cop had secured the apartment until a warrant would be issued so they could check the premises. The first search was executed the same day while Hawkins Jr. sat at the interview room. 18-inch square of carpet had been removed from the master bedroom's flooring. Luminol, which picks up blood, was used, and there was possibly presence of blood on the bed rail. 80% of the hallway was full of blood. The hallway bathroom was located with so much chemicals, it was difficult to pick up. The chemicals were overwhelming in certain areas. The second warrant executed for the home search while Hawkins Jr. was on his 48-hour hold with 24 hours remaining. In the master bedroom, they found a pair of child's panties on top of a dark blue adult men's pajamas. Scrapes across a kitchen floor like furniture had been moved. The apartment next door was unlocked and opened. The refrigerator was extremely clean. The shelving in the refrigerator had been pushed up to the top. The refrigerator was unplugged with the smell of bleach. The officers went to the apartment dumpster, which was searched, but no additional evidence was in there. The children would tell the investigators that Hawkins brought and returned a power saw to Kmart. Officers were able to retrieve the surveillance footage at Kmart dated February 9th, 2008, the day Charlene went missing and the kids were with him. Unfortunately, the power saw he used could not be retrieved. They would conduct a final interview with Hawkins Jr. They would give him his Miranda rights and this time ask him to sign a waiver. He wouldn't. He told them he would answer anything they wanted to know. He was asked about a missing mattress, a large hole in the carpet, and a missing deep freezer. He denied throwing out a mattress, and there was no deep freezer in the apartment. He said the carpet had been missing since he moved in. He moved in 2 weeks before his children moved in. As the sergeant walked him back to his jail cell, Hawkins Jr. started to blurt out, quote, "I didn't do it. I didn't do it, but I may have covered it up," unquote. Hawkins Jr. again refused to sign a waiver, but he wanted confirmation he wouldn't be charged with first-degree murder. The officer couldn't give him that confirmation. He said his daughter had killed her mother. Hawkins Jr. decided to come clean about what happened to the mother of his children that night. On February 8th, Charlene stayed at home. Him and the kids went to the movies. When he came back, the boys went to bed, but KT and him stayed up watching TV. Charlene woke up and fussed at him and KT. Because she was up too late, Charlene went back to bed. He said he slept on the sofa. He had woke up Saturday morning, and Charlene and KT were now arguing in the master bedroom. KT was holding a knife. He was walking towards her to get the knife from KT, but it was too late. He had stabbed Charlene in the neck before he could reach her. He said he held Charlene in his arms for 2 hours while she was dead. KT said, "Daddy, you have to help me cover this up. I don't want to go to prison for the rest of my life." He continues. He said to protect KT, they dismembered Charlene's body. We put her in the Mississippi River. Hawkins Jr. described the severing in the bathroom, the commute, the cleanup, everything. He even offered to guide them to where the body was. For the next couple of days, they went to look for the body, but they were unsuccessful. It was due to freezing rains in Memphis and low temperatures. No search teams could be done, and her body parts have never been found. I had read in other reports that they had threatened KT that if she didn't come clean after her father gave his confession of KT, and she did. As KT sat into interview room with the sergeant, Murray. She had answered questions prior, but as her cell phone was ringing, she got very nervous. She answered the phone and said, "Who's calling?" The male caller said, "James Hawkins." "Bitch, don't talk to my daughter," and hung up. KT got very upset. She was assured that Hawkins Jr. was still in jail. KT had thought he'd been released. She gave her statement, and her brothers would give their statements. James Hawkins Jr. was formally charged with murder. In the beginning, they said it was nice. The children had been in there for about 3 weeks before everything changed. Charlene and Hawkins Jr. began to argue a lot. She felt that he was paying more attention to KT than to the boys. Charlene and Hawkins Jr. would fight violently at times. He would break her cell phone when she threatened to call the police. The children remembered in the middle of the night she would wake them up and they would leave with her. They would wait in the parking lot for Milton Harris to bring the keys to the spare apartment. Sometimes they would hear their mother being slapped multiple times through the walls in her room. One of the brothers stated how his sister changed after living with their father. She had become rude and disobedient to their mother, and nothing would happen. But if she talked or spoke that way to our father, she would, quote, get beat, unquote. Their father had also told KT not to speak to her mother. The brother had also seen his father in what he described as tongue-kissing KT. He didn't tell anyone. He was scared. On another occasion, all three of them again were in the living room with their dad. He told the boys to stay in the living room. KT and him left the living room. One of the boys went looking for batteries and saw their father on top of KT on the floor in her bedroom. He scolded the boy to go back to the living room, and it was never discussed again. One of the brothers spoke of the night that they would see their mother. They all went out to the movies. Their mother stayed home. She wasn't feeling well. When they returned, the arguing started. It continued all through the night. They would say they heard their mother screaming over and over again, quote, KT is my baby, unquote. KT would enter the bedroom and turn up the TV in their room as loud as it could go, and she told the boys to stay in the room. They heard their mother screaming, and then it would stop. Silence. At the same time, they saw a dark car in the parking lot leaving the apartment complex. KT would come in and turn the volume down. She told them their mother was, quote, gone, unquote. And she told them to go back to sleep and stay in the room. The boys knew something wasn't right. Their mother would never just, quote, up and leave like that, unquote. Later on, Hawkins Jr. would take his children to purchase the power saw. Their father told them to wait in the car outside the apartment. KT and him was preparing a surprise for them inside. They would be sitting in the car for over 3 hours. One of the brothers had to use the bathroom. His father let him in. As he opened the hallway bathroom, he saw a tennis shoe and assumed it was KT. He hurried and closed it shut. After he used the bathroom in the other room, his father followed him to the front door and locked it. He returned to the car and waited with his brother. A while later, the father and KT returned to the car. They drove around the town from dumpster to dumpster, throwing large black trash bags inside. A huge hole was cut in the mattress that was thrown out. A big piece of the carpet that was thrown out. As the family returned back to the apartment, one of the boys made a comment, "It stunk." The family would then ride to Family Dollar, where KT saw her father throw the knife away he killed their mother with in the trash can. The children all began to clean the apartment. One of the brothers saw red liquid dripping from the freezer, and he thought it was Hawaiian punch and asked for some. His father responded, "That's not Hawaiian punch," and told him not to open the freezer. The boys and their father would move the freezer to the back patio. He said it didn't work. Then it was thrown out because it was broken. All the evidence by the sons was damning. Then KT would add her statement. In 2007, KT was 12. She was sleeping at her dad's sister's house. She was in the room with her cousin when her dad woke her up and told her to come and watch TV with him in the living room. She did. She said she fell asleep and awoke to him touching her vagina. She told him to stop. He refused. He covered her mouth. He told her to be quiet, and he did it again. He inserted his fingers. He would tell her not to tell anyone anything, and he threatened to hurt her if she did. She never told her mother. She never told anyone. Soon after that, that's when they would move to that tiny apartment in Memphis. The touching was frequent, and things had gotten worse. He touched her vagina, her buttocks, her breast. She had to forcefully touch his penis with her hands or her mouth. If she protested, he would hit her, punch her in her stomach, or put the knife to her throat, threatening to kill her. KT recalled when she was having the miscarriage. Her father rode in the ambulance with her. I suppose he didn't want anyone to know that his daughter had miscarried his baby. She also said at the Child Advocacy Center, she couldn't say anything. Her father wasn't in the room, but he had driven her there for her appointment, and she had to go back home with him. She said her mother, for a brief time, moved in the spare apartment, but then she came right back to their father. Another thing I wondered, Charlene suspected so much. Why didn't she just stay in the spare apartment? KT said the sexual abuse started immediately. She just obeyed. She said her father, quote, gets crazy, unquote, if she didn't. KT would recall that night. She said that her father had asked her to help kill her mother. She refused to do that. Her father grabbed her by her shirt, put the knife to her throat, and threatened to kill her. They were arguing. KT was up late watching TV. When she fell asleep and woke up, they were still arguing. She would go into her brother's room, cut the TV up, and tell them to stay there. They had been arguing for hours. KT saw her father go into the kitchen and get a knife. He was concealing it when he came back into the room where her mother was. The arguing continued. He threatened her. She said she was going to call the police. He told her she wasn't going to call anyone. She said, quote, whatever, James, unquote. She went to lay on her side of the bed.